Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'll be your host for today, and my name is Daniel Eborall. The topic for today's webinar is ethical standards and best practices for artificial intelligence in video analytics. We've got a great lineup, starting with David Bain, who will be discussing AI ethics and compliance, Nick Ptitsyn, who will be discussing where the technology is today and giving an overview of that. Calvin Yadav will be discussing where the North American market is today, and then we will follow up with a Q&A session to conclude the webinar. So if you have any questions for David, Nick, or Calvin, be sure to add them in the chat box, and we'll get to as many of those as we can towards the end of the webinar. Just as a reminder as well, this webinar is recorded and it'll be available on the IREX YouTube channel. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, David Bain. David is a globally recognized thought leader in technology standards, a former vice president of the Telecommunication Industry Association, and currently an executive at the Technology Integrity Council, which is located in Washington, DC. David will be discussing AI ethics and compliance. So David, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the kind introduction and the invitation to participate today. One of the mantras from the Spider-Man series of movies is that with great power comes great responsibility. And so since I learned recently that your company, IREX, came in first in the NIST facial recognition accuracy competition, I guess you have that great responsibility now that you have the great power. NIST for our international participants is the National Institute for Standards and Technology just outside of Washington, DC here. So congratulations on that. And I also want to commend you for your company being proactive about addressing this issue. And joking about movies aside, it's a very serious issue, and I want to recognize that you're doing the right thing by taking the first steps forward toward a future in which sensible constraints through laws, regulations, standards, and best practices can help humanity to avoid the dystopian pitfalls of this very powerful technology. So we've got so much to share and just a couple of minutes here. And so I'm going to prioritize my thoughts around three areas. First, I'll give a few comments about the status of facial recognition technology in the world today, mainly in Europe and the USA. The unique approach that the Technology Integrity Council takes in DC to address technology safety and technology risk generally in a cross-domain sort of way, and then finish up by highlighting a few of the specific risks and mitigation thoughts that we have with respect to facial recognition and AI video analytics. Preface all of this by saying that this discussion is about civilian, not military AI, obviously, and that the views expressed are entirely my own, and that though the Technology Integrity Council does plan on convening a working group or a study group on this topic later in the year, we have not yet kicked off this work, and we expect that by the fall, we will have some more prioritized recommendations on this topic. So I look forward to circling back with you after that important work has been completed. I want to show you the map that a company called Surfshark has made available. This is the facial recognition world map. This graphic is already about a year old, but it still captures pretty well the status of things in the world. You can see that facial recognition is very broadly used In the United States, we've been using it in one form or another since about 2001 by law enforcement. And there are very few countries, most notably Belgium and Luxembourg, that have had outright moratoria on, or are leading the way for pushing back against the unfettered use of facial recognition. So to talk more specifically about what's happening in Europe, Europe has really led the world in privacy, protecting privacy of citizens, obviously with GDPR. Currently, the European Commission has proposed a law that goes above and beyond GDPR for artificial intelligence, including video analytics, facial recognition. There are a few tenets that have come forward in the early discussions. Regulatory assessment should be based on context, and personal data, for instance, should be treated very differently than machine data. Another idea that's coming to the fore is that algorithmic transparency and explainability should be a major consideration. And most of all, that the future law should reflect European values, ensuring human dignity, freedom, equality, democracy, and the rule of law as recognized in Europe. And these will be the guiding ideas that inform the constraints to be placed on AI, including facial recognition technology. Now, though this work is happening now, I'm told that 2023 is the earliest, it's the optimistic time at which Europe might have a law that gets unanimously adopted, unanimously approved by all of the member states, and then there's additional time required to enact it. So, you know, we're in a period right now where the onus is really on the other jurisdictions to step up, and on the providers of the technology themselves to anticipate the future requirements. So the map of the USA looks like there really aren't any limitations or any discussions happening around artificial intelligence. What you can't see in a map like this is that state and local jurisdictions are the ones leading the conversations, because places like San Francisco, Somerville, Massachusetts, Berkeley, and a few others have adopted on the state and local level, in the absence of a federal law that would regulate on a national basis this technology. Now, the significant thing that's happening right now is, even though there hasn't been a change in privacy law in the US since 2012, there are efforts currently on Capitol Hill. Most interestingly to me, there is a discussion of Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act, which takes some of the privacy protections that are reflected in the COPA, FERPA, and CCPA, and pushing those privacy protections to the teen age, and not just kids that are, you know, preteen. Other developments in the US are that the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, plans to use facial recognition universally in airports by 2023. NIST has been given the task of really pushing the benchmarking of bias in facial recognition. And the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, in the Biden White House has been elevated to be a cabinet level position And all of the appointees that I've heard about that are proposed for OSTP are people who are, well steeped in the tools of implementing legal and regulatory constraints on technologies that are overdue for having some limits placed on them. So, how does the Technology Safety Council generally function? We are looking for the way to keep the baby and pour out the bathwater. How do you? That's the age-old need. And so, what are a few of the common cross-domain practices that we have discovered by looking at a lot of different technologies, from smartphones and apps, artificial intelligence, both narrow and general, artificial general intelligence, autonomous, quantum computing, CRISPR technology. I have a nice list here, but I'll just mention a few. Generally speaking, technology is difficult to put back in the box after it's out. Another general truth about these technologies, new impactful technologies, is that a key to their appropriate use is getting to a place of symmetric understanding and experience with the technology. And by that, we mean we're trying to avoid a knowledge gap between the OEMs and the users of the technology. Facebook being probably the most famous example of where there was a dramatic informational asymmetry between the users and the platform owners. Another general best practice or general truth is that any honest risk assessment of an advanced technology is also considering the null case, the risk of non-use or delayed use of the technology. The great example of this being driverless vehicles. When driverless vehicles are not used, there is a real cost to society in terms of 30,000 lives on American roads lost every year to human error. So now let's turn to some of the specifics for facial recognition technology. We talk about not wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And what is the baby? The baby is protecting our schools and public venues against terrorism of many forms, protection from violent crime and theft, the accountability of public safety workers, protection of those same public safety workers, as well as the convenience and enrichment of life and opportunity of contactless transactions in the age when we're trying not to infect each other with COVID. Some other those are the babies. Those are the things that we don't want to give up, and we know that over time we can get to a point where we're not we're able to establish the appropriate limitations to be able to safely use these technologies. But what are the risks? The risks, as we've seen, are use of the technology by totalitarian regimes for oppression, for genocide, for cover-ups and erosion of liberal democracy. There is the risk of algorithmic bias. You probably have seen the movie on Netflix called Coded Bias, which goes into great detail about this problem. There is the problem of mass surveillance for commercial exploitation. There is the problem of faulty or non-performant technology, false positives, false negatives. And then there is the the issue of over-reliance on the technology, overconfidence in it, and lack of understanding of the limitations of the tech. Lastly, before I turn over to the next speaker, I'd like to say that you know, for the sake of the techno-democracies that are expected to gather in Washington, perhaps as early as this fall, there is concern over the potentially chilling effect of facial recognition on public protests. That if there is a hesitancy or a chilling effect on the right of peaceful assembly, this could hamper one of the mechanisms that our free societies rely on to improve over time and to push back and agitate for change and progress. So those are my thoughts. Thank you. I'll hand it back to you, Daniel.
Thank you for that, David. Just a couple of housekeeping things. For all questions at the end for Nick, David, or Calvin, just put them into the all panelists and attendees. So when you address your questions, just make sure that you address it to all panelists and attendees. Okay, so our next speaker, we have Nick Ptitsyn. Nick is current IREX CTO, and he's overseen over 10 different computer vision startups surrounding security, healthcare, and sports. Nick is now going to give you an overview of where the technology is today. I'm very excited to see it. So Nick, it's over to you.
Hello, everyone. So I would like to start with the biggest challenge my R&D team has been working on for several years, and this is decoded bias. No artificial intelligence algorithm or even a human brain is unbiased. And of course, face recognition, as well as any other behavioral analytics, has a substantial bias toward different demographic groups, for example, by age groups, gender, or skin color. And personally, I don't like the name coded bias because it sounds like somebody coded the algorithm on purpose. In fact, it happens naturally because of data sets. For instance, a Chinese facial recognition algorithm would perform much better with Asian population than in the US, and vice versa. An American firm will develop a better algorithm for American people. So I believe that artificial intelligence bias, it's not actually bias, but it's these are skills, and all these algorithms, they have different skills. So my team used more than 50 million images to train the IREX facial recognition algorithm and make it as unbiased as possible. But still, we have different issues. And the solution, in my opinion, is to be fully transparent and to run independent tests and make this information available to end users, regulators, and other stakeholders. So let me start sharing my screen, and I would like to show you one of the NIST reports that includes IREX bias data. It's available online on the NIST website. And these are the numbers, these are error rates which draw my attention, and now we are working on improving it. In fact, the new algorithm is performing much better. As you can see, the error rates for females are much higher than for males. That's because we have more criminals and arrested people that are males. But of course, the truly unbiased algorithm should do equally well on both genders. And also for kids and teenagers, the accuracy is lower than for older people. And the goal is to make this table equally wide with a minimal area for all groups. So the second item I would like to talk about are the narrow constraint to use facial recognition algorithm by law enforcement. Recently, the EU has introduced a draft legislation to govern that. And we would like to make sure that IREX is in line with that. In particular, we developed an architecture that enables to view only specific people that may cause a threat to public safety. And right now, I'm showing you how the facial recognition algorithm works. And as you can see, most people here, they're marked as unknown, which means that IREX algorithm doesn't recognize random people, or neither it tracks them, but the platform is able of identifying specific individuals that are wanted by law. So if I go to the database, right now I have 92 people as examples. I have preloaded IREX team and some others. And these are specific people that are recognized by the algorithm. The interface you see now is permission driven. What I mean is that different user groups see different results as they search or when they receive alerts. So for example, if I log out and if I sign in as a different user and I go to the search page, I will see many more people that are identified, and that's because I have used a different account which has access to a database which is more than what we saw before. Here I have 4,500 people, and so I have more visibility. And finally, the fourth item is logging and audit. So all the search queries and photo operations are recorded. So if we go straight to logs, you will see a detailed log of all actions performed by users. So if I select, for example, faces, person added to list, apply, then I can find myself. So I have recently added a person called Arseny to a database. And to conclude, I would like to talk about cybersecurity. So no physical security system can exist without proper cybersecurity. And we paid a lot of attention to IREX protection. We run a web application firewall, as well as many other state-of-the-art tools to protect the data stored in the system. And we believe that altogether, these technological features make IREX very, very robust in the field of ethical AI. Thank you.
Brilliant, Nikolai. I think that one of the key takeaways from that is that clients do build their own databases, and they are auditable and they are transparent. And so that just brings me into the next speaker, which is Calvin Yadav. Calvin has a blended background in AI, ML, engineering, and in electronic warfare. Calvin has launched various technologies, generating over 3.5 billion in revenue. And Calvin will be discussing where the North American market is today and an overview of that. So welcome, Calvin.
Learning so much from David and Nick right today. I would like to just quickly, as the final speaker of this conference, I would like to take us back to 500 BC, you know, when the Chinese philosopher General Sun Tzu stated, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not to fear the result of 100 battles. So all the way from Sun Tzu to machine learning, having good data is more than half the battle. And Sun Tzu understood that very well, that how properly using data allow leaders to make critical decisions that will lead to victory or defeat. Fast forward to present day, and the importance of synthesizing the data continues to grow in our modern world. Artificial intelligence is transforming every segment of American life, from the point of view of application ranging from medical diagnosis to precision agriculture to advanced manufacturing and autonomous transportation. David talked about that a little bit, to all the way to national security and defense. And the pace of AI development is rapid, and AI is already having substantial economic impact, not only for the companies whose core business is AI, like IREX, but also for nearly all other companies as they discover the need to adopt AI technology to stay globally competitive. Now, many leaders are excited about AI's potential to basically profoundly transforming the organization by making them more innovative and productive. But implementing AI will also lead to significant changes in how organizations are managed. Basically, organizations across North America will require to change their workspace structure, technology strategies, and technology governance. US as a nation has made a critical progress in carrying out this national strategy and continues to make United States leadership in AI as a top priority. North America, and specifically US, I believe maintain its global leadership in AI, not through just top-down government policies, but through an unparalleled innovation ecosystem, from public agencies to academic communities to private sector innovators and nonprofits, and each have a unique necessary role. And not to mention the synergistic effect of collaboration among these stakeholders. And US's strong innovation ecosystem, fueled by this strategic private and public investment with these visionary scientists and entrepreneurs, has basically changed the game and setting as a North Star for the rest of the world. Now, there's a broad awareness of the risk inherent in using AI, and we are very well aware of that, but very few practitioners have taken action to create policies and process to manage risk, including ethical, legal, reputational, and financial risk. Everybody talks about the rewards of the AI, but not a lot of speaking about the responsibilities. David mentioned, from Spider-Man, great powers comes with great responsibilities. Love the movie, David, by the way. But actually, I really believe managing ethical risk is not a risk. It's actually an opportunity. And I build strategies for living. So those with more advanced AI practices are establishing processes and policies for technology governance and risk management, including providing ways to explain how their algorithms deliver results. We just saw Nick kind of demoing that in a very quick form. And basically, that transparency is the key word here. In US, AI organization that point out their understanding of how their AI system reached their conclusion is both an emerging best practice, and I believe it's a necessity. And in order to ensure that the human intelligence that feeds and nurtures the AI systems keep the pace with the machine's advancement. Today, actually, in North America, I'm starting to see that AI is just not a buzzword and a quick payback topic, honestly speaking. AI and analytics have become the direction of a business and basically how AI can solve problems. So as the CEO of IREX, I made a priority to spread a message that ethical standards and best practices for AI in video surveillance and video analytics needs to be a mindset, not just a phrase on a poster. And putting where our money, where our mouth is, IREX as a company partnered with DHS on locating over 500,000 missing kids in US. By setting up an example in the North American region, we have decided to give our AI software for free in support of fight against human and child trafficking. And, there is a growing realization that AI system must be trustworthy, and that AI cloud platforms are transforming many sectors for social and economic life, including employment, healthcare, and manufacturing. Global leadership in AI actually matters. So today there are many AI development strategies being conducted in US and North American region. I want to highlight top three for real quick. One of them is making a long-term investment in AI research. advancing hardware for improved AI, developing scalable AI system, enhancing the data-focused methodologies. That's very important when we're making those investment in AI research. Second strategy in North American region right now is being deployed is developing effective methods for human AI collaboration, basically seeking new algorithms for human-aware AI, developing more effective language processing systems, etc. And the final and the core of this talk and the final strategy that the US is really deploying is understanding and addressing the ethical, legal, and societal implication of AI, improving the fairness, transparency, accountability by design of the AI, the code, building ethical AI, designing architectures for ethical AI. Now, we are coming out of this pandemic in North America, and my personal goal is to be primary champion for the introduction of new strategic technologies in IREX and ultimately in the entire region of North America. And I'm not the only one in the industry proposing new methods of encouraging talks on architecture, API strategies, and technologies. And some have made mission to create data analytics boot camps for their organization. The United States and North America region must foster public trust and confidence in AI technologies and protect civil liberties, privacy, and American values in their application in order to fully realize the potential of technologies for all the people. And more, I cannot emphasize this point, more and more R&D is needed to develop AI architectures that incorporate ethical, legal, and societal concern through technical mechanisms such as transparency and explainability. And that concludes my talk, Daniel. Back to you, man.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Calvin. I noticed that there's a Chelsea scarf now in the background of you. That wouldn't be anything to do with the Champions League final, would it?
Well, it certainly does. I bleed blue, as they say.
All the same. We'll move on. So we do have a few questions that have already come in. The first one is for David. David, regarding the commitments from the software developers, the platforms to make it auditable and transparent, how can you guarantee that the end users, or just how can you make it applicable for the end users to observe these ethical standards that should be in place?
That's a good question. You bring up the point that the ethical foundation depends not just on the engineering and the design or the architecture of the software from the OEM, but also how it's implemented, its implementation, and its operation. And yeah, for sure, any future requirements for audits, etc., should definitely extend to the operations. Future requirements for processes, policies, and personnel training should very much also include the licensees and implementers of the technology. So yeah, short answer, a holistic and multi-level approach is the way to address that, in my opinion. Happy for other panelists to chime in on that, the true experts on these technologies.
I do have a question for Nick. Nick, would you like to follow on from what David said, or would you like to have your tailored question, which has come?
Yeah, well, let's carry on with the new question.
Okay. The question what was asked is, how many faces are in the IREX database?
Well, it depends on the country. At the moment, IREX operates on a production scale in 6 countries. So it depends on the population size and policies. In certain small countries, for example, in the Middle East or Eastern Europe, we may have few thousands of people that are researched by police. But in larger countries like the US, the database can reach millions. And of course, we should be careful about who gets in the list to prevent unwanted effects on people's lives. But I would like to emphasize that the platform itself doesn't make any decision about, for this physical world. It's always a human or police that takes action based on the information that comes out of the system.
Excellent, excellent. And I do have a question now for Calvin. A lot's come through for David, but I want to get through to Calvin because this is a pretty good question, actually. So the question came in. It says, how do you gain still be competitive in the market, even when you can put ethical values at the forefront? That's quite a good question, actually.
Yeah. So how do we make this ethics as a challenge or an issue and an opportunity and create a competitive advantage? I get asked this question quite a lot, and my answer is always the same, man. In a nutshell, if you want to gain a massive market share and want to create a real long-term impact on your customers and your users, then just provide a value or enough value via your software that way beyond what your customer has paid for. Just the basics. And then just by being the first or the most complicated, AI is not going to win a massive market share. And in order to build systems basically that robustly behave well, we of course need to decide what good behavior means in each applications and domain. And this ethical dimension is tied intimately to the questions of what engineering techniques are available, how reliable these techniques are, and what trade-offs are made. And, we will require intensive collaboration among technical experts as well as stakeholders and specialists in other fields, including the social and behavioral science, law, ethics, and philosophy. And I'm so glad you're hosting this conference too, to promote this exact conversation. So yeah, that would be in a nutshell, create a value way beyond what your customer and user is paying for, and promote partnership from other regions and other industries. So understanding this opportunity of ethics, and I'm keep emphasizing it's an opportunity. It's not a challenge or some sort of way slowing down the innovation.
Okay, so I believe that we've got 2 more questions in the Q&A. Let me just try and get to those. Okay, this one's just thrown out here because it's not to David, Nick, or Calvin, so whichever one of you wants to take this on. It says, in the UK watch list, selection has been identified as being absolutely key to ethical use of AFR. How do you ensure proportionality when it comes to the watch list inclusion? So what I believe it is, how do you ensure that it's, the lists are proportionate when it comes to the challenges in hand?
Yeah, I want to just pull an extra thread on what Nick just said, that I was in the artificial intelligence office in the Army's Future Command in Texas. And there was the exact same sort of, let's just say, philosophy there that, and something I touched on, the 3 strategies that are human and AI collaboration, that our AI helps humans make decisions. So humans are the biased one, not the AI in itself. So we don't, as a matter of fact, IREX as a company or a platform do not interfere in any type of decision making. Those protocols get set up by the users, the human beings who are using the technology for. Not to say, and maybe David would be a better person to speak on that. That not to say that we don't take that as seriously, that who's using of a technology and etc. Because as this is why we're hosting this conference and we're leading this conversation. It's important to us to lead those ethical issues.
Yeah, I'll just throw in that the responsibility from the OEM's perspective is to provide a system that is, number one, very secure, and keeping all of the logs of permission-based changes that are made in the system. And that is the type of system I understand you to have. From a process standpoint, I think in an ideal world, not only is the process by which that watch list is amended or changed, not only is that process transparent and auditable, but the process by which you arrive at that process is also something that has a degree of transparency and fairness that people can buy into, and that's where you start to build true trust in your outcomes.
So you're saying technology helps catch technology, right? Because yeah, poison kills poison, as the old saying goes.
Yeah, maybe the person who's making the change to the log all has to have their own face recognized before they can do that.
There you go. There you go.
Two more questions. I believe that these will be more of theory answers rather than concrete answers. As the first one is, why IBM? Why did IBM step down from the facial recognition business? They were talking about ethical and human rights. So I believe that this will be more of a theory answer to the question rather than a concrete answer.
I can quickly give you a sort of an inside perspective, because one of my mentors worked for IBM, and she made me aware about why IBM did that. It's just I'm trying to think how to say this in the right way, you know, an open platform, that as much as there's a red tape, there is a philosophy on facial recognition or identifying people. That kind of technology does come with a social pressure. And I think David will be very well on that. But I just wanted to give a perspective of how the employees felt, because you cannot have innovation without a little bit of shrugging of the shoulders, and, you know, without moving forward. As the old saying goes, you can't make the omelet without cracking some eggs. But I think IBM had a lot of red tape as a corporation, and they're a public traded company. So I think they just didn't want that, where someone like IREX, we can be bold. And there are other companies also doing a lot of good stuff. And we making sure that we don't hide from these ethical issues. You know, we actually bring them to light and turn them into opportunity. And actually, we're cheering for AI to have some legislative backing, meaning like make it legal. And once anything becomes legal, it will have standards and rules, and conversations like these will help too. What do you think about what I said, David?
Yeah. I mean, not to speak for IBM or any of the others that have shied away from this area. It is a lightning rod, and these big companies that have their shareholders to be accountable to, and the daily ups and downs of the stock market, they can be forgiven for not holding on too tightly to this lightning rod. But it is an important technology, and generally technology is the way, you know, to bridge off of your philosophical observations. You know, Thomas Hobbes, who said about life is in the natural state before a social contract, it was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And taming the technologies is a way to not have that solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. IBM in particular is, I think, perhaps because of the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, they have a long tradition of weathering criticism and suspicion about the technology. The HAL 9000 computer in that movie, for people who don't know, was based off of one letter off of HAL, was one letter off of IBM. That's why they named the AI that went berserk in that movie, they named it HAL.
Great. We do have one last question, and this is directed to you, Calvin. It is, from your business point of view, so I believe that you're going to be going in the future to answer this. In your business point of view, when do you think government entities will make a turnaround implementing AI in cameras? At least 90% of total cameras.
Yeah, I think it's happening as we speak. I think it's a living standard or a tradition, because the push from the private sector has been a lot positive, and I think the public sector always been a little bit behind on sort of reacting. And I always believe proactive tech is always better than reactive tech. And so I think it's happening right now, a short answer. And when it will get to 90%, I think we just have to show, and it's the society we live in, where all the bad part of an AI or a tech get emphasized and nuclearized a lot in the mainstream media and all that, but the good doesn't. Like David mentioned about autonomous cars and saving lives. We talked about like fight against human and child trafficking, and identifying like terroristic activities by technologies. All of that things needs to be, I think, once those things start to get like a little bit more exposure, I think the speed will happen. But I believe in next, I think 2 to 3 years, I really believe that most of the cameras will be AI analytical, and most of them already are, honestly speaking. They just have to turn that on.
Excellent. Well, that concludes our webinar today. This is recorded and it will be available on the IREX YouTube channel. Everybody that signed up for the webinar will also receive an email with the link attached to it. So we thank you all for attending today's webinar, and if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at hello@IREX.ai or visit our website IREX.ai. Thank you for attending.